What is the biggest barrier to change? Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of The Future in 5. My name is Jacob Morgan, and this is where I share my thoughts, ideas, and commentary on the future of work in 5 minutes or less. I just came back from Prague last night, actually. I spoke at the Microsoft Leadership Summit. I was there for a week. My wife went with me, so in addition to speaking at the conference, we also took a little bit of a mini vacation. It was freezing cold, so it was probably like 20 degrees there, 30 degrees. But we had a lot of fun, did all the touristy stuff, and spoke at the conference to around 300 CXOs, so people at different C-level leadership positions throughout companies in the Czech Republic and the surrounding areas. And my talk was all around the 5 trends that are shaping the future of work. You've heard me talk about those here many, many times, so I won't repeat them. But during the Q&A, one of the attendees there raised his hand and he said, I like the presentation, but what do you see are the biggest barriers to change for organizations? In other words, why are some organizations not changing? And that's a great question. And I actually talked about that in my newsletter last week as well, but I wanted to do a video on that. And I think the biggest barrier to change is up here. It's all in the head. In other words, when we think about the future of work, and when we think about things like millennials or collaboration technologies or flexible work programs or real-time feedback or any of the many concepts, new leadership and management models and approaches, when we think about all these new different types of concepts and ideas, there are a lot of case studies, research examples, etc., of how these things work, why they work, companies that are doing it, etc. In other words, the strategies are there, the tactics are there, the examples are there, the research is there, but where organizations struggle is not having enough information to be able to make these changes. It's managers and leaders and people in senior executive positions that are having a very hard time wrapping their minds around it. In other words, the biggest obstacle to change is mental. It's committing. It's to making that change. And we have to remember that a lot of the people that are running our organizations, and even younger people as well. I mean, we were taught to do things in a very process-oriented way, to think long-term, 5-10 years out. We were taught to, do things in a very set linear way when it comes to changing our organizations. In fact, I interviewed Rita McGrath, who's a professor at the Columbia Business School. I interviewed her for one of my podcasts, and she had a book that came out called, why, I don't remember the exact words, but it was The End of Competitive Advantage, I believe. And so it just goes to show that we live in a very, very different world where a lot of these processes and linear ways of thinking and evolving our organizations no longer work. And so a lot of our organizations have a very hard time adapting to that, and they have a very hard time changing because they can't get their minds around the fact that we have to change quicker, that the way that we think about our organizations has to change, that we need to focus more on experimentation and on testing ideas instead of, creating these 5-10 year long plans and waiting for other people to do things so we can kind of copy them. This idea of it's okay to be a late adopter doesn't work anymore, right? Late adopter means out of business. So I think that's really the biggest obstacle for a lot of companies is getting their managers to wrap their minds around the fact that, why do we need to change? How is change different today than it was before? And so that's the big challenge for companies. I don't think it has anything to do with having the right technologies in place or the research or the examples. All that stuff exists. It's getting the right people in the positions of power that can see that change is coming, why it's important to change, why it's important to change quickly, why it's important to experiment. That is where the big challenge for organizations is. And unfortunately, the organizations that are able to wrap their minds around it, the people in positions of power, the managers, the executives that kind of get it, so to speak, I think those are the organizations that are going to do very well, and those are the ones that are going to succeed. And the ones that don't are going to go the way of Blockbuster and Kodak and several other organizations that have, disappeared off the face of the earth because they just can't wrap their minds around it. They don't get it. They don't see it. And unfortunately, by the time they do, it's too late, and they're, it's a sinking ship, and they're trying to sort of, doggy paddle to stay above water. So curious to hear what you think. Obviously, you guys work in your own organizations. You talk to probably other organizations as well. Why do you think organizations are not changing? From my perspective, from what I see, that is the big challenge for companies. It's a mental sort of change management culture shift that a lot of people are struggling with, and it's getting used to this new way of working, right? Getting away from this linear process and focusing more on experimentation and testing things out. I think that's a big change for a lot of organizations because that's not how they were taught to run. That's not how they were, taught to evolve. They're used to things taking 5 and 10 years and having these long, drawn-out strategies and things being put into place. And unfortunately, we just don't live in that type of a world anymore, right? We just don't. And so it'll be very interesting to see what happens to organizations over the next 5 years. Which organizations disappear off the Fortune 500 list and which new incumbents start to resurface. I talked about this in a previous episode where I talked about why change is different now. It was called Why It's Different This Time. And just to recap, those 3 reasons are because we live in a very connected world, because the pace of change is increasing at a continuously rapid pace, and because everyone and every organization everywhere around the world is being disrupted. Now, when we live in that type of a world, it's very easy to see why sort of, the approaches from the 70s, 80s, 60s, and beyond no longer work, right? It's very easy to see why we need a different way to think about work. And again, keyword there is think about work, different way to think about work. And that's something that a lot of organizations are struggling with. So that's it for me on this week's episode of The Future in 5. Curious to hear what you think. I shared my words, my piece, so to speak. Of course, if you want to get access to more videos, you can visit thefutureorganization.com. You can connect with me on Twitter @JacobM. I'm also going to start doing some sponsorship stuff for the newsletter, for the podcasts, for the videos, and for a couple other things. So if you're interested in that, you can always send me an email, jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Of course, make sure to check out the FOW community to see what other organizations around the world are doing. That's FOWcommunity.com. I'll see you next time on an episode of The Future in 5. Hey, are you interested in the future of work? If so, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can get all the latest content on the future of work and stay up to date on all the latest trends and happenings. Not to mention, you will make me very, very happy. Make sure to subscribe.